So complete change of theme. You could say not really related to the things that we've been seeing today, and somehow not yet related to EC, but hopefully in the future, yes. Okay. So it's about intensive longitudinal studies. So I think it's more, I'm going to talk about the different elements in terms of method. So if you want to build an ambulatory assessment study or longitudinal, um, what kind of thing you need to think about and be careful, and yeah, this, and also mainly the advantages to look at this kind of method in terms of how and what kind of information about psychological processes that we can get. So, but yeah, it's mostly, I'm not going to talk about a lot about analysis. Julia will say something. I think it will be a good introduction to what Julia is going to present tomorrow. For me, I'm just going to tell you what kind of analysis or what kind of processes, or not processes, but analysis or indexes or statistical index that you can look at using this intensive longitudinal study. But I'm not going to enter into details. So, yeah, this is the outline. So what is it in terms of how it can be defined and what are the advantages, the kind of limitation or difficulties you can encounter when you're doing it, the type of designs, so also what kind of information you can get depending on the design that you have, and the type of research question you can ask. And here we're playing different purpose settings. So you have different names for the same thing. Sometimes you have some details that can vary, but mainly intensive longitudinal data or experience sampling or ecological momentary assessment or daily diary, which is different, mobile sensing, ambient sensing. It's all referring to the fact that you're going to collect data in an intensive way. Okay, so instead of having one data collection in the lab or online one time, you're going to have multiple assessments per day or in the month or in the week or something. Okay, so, and you can we can see that you can assess many different things. And the idea is that you have multiple, so intensive in the sense of we're not talking about a couple of assessments. Okay, we are talking much more. And the advantage is that you can have that in real life. So you don't ask people to come into the lab, but you're collecting data in their everyday life activities. Okay. So what can be assessed? I would say what cannot be assessed, because you can do a lot of things. So what we know, especially in the literature that I know of, most of the time it's about emotion, perception, affect, cognition, behaviors. Okay, so I don't know how many cigarettes you consume per day or coffee, or so every time you're having a cigarette, then you enter the information, or that I will ask you 5 times a day if you're feeling upset or sad or happy or something like this. Okay, so you can have different type of or I can ask every time you are having a fight with your partner, then you will have to enter to complete the survey or something like this. Okay. Or location settings. So you know, you can have information about where you're going or with whom you are interacting, or this kind of information. So many information that can be assessed, and different way of assessing it. So self-report, I'm just asking you to, to report how you feel, okay? But I can also ask you to report how your kid is feeling, okay, or your partner is feeling, um, or I don't know, if you're a teacher, the kids that you're teaching, how they are feeling or how they are behaving. Okay, so I will report. Basically, it's the same kind of aspect that you have when you actually survey. You can have peer report or other report and self-report. Basically, that's the same thing. You can have also measure performance. We'll see that, for example, the step counter that is very common now. So this is another that could be considered as a longitudinal or intensive assessment if you are measuring, I don't know, how many steps you're taking every day for a month, for example. Okay. And then you can have behavioral indicators. So, now that with your phone, you can have many information, okay, so where you are. So, I don't know if you are familiar, but sometimes, especially during the COVID period, that was very funny, receiving the Google report of your activity and how much you've been traveling during the last month. That was funny during COVID lockdown. The use of smartphones. So there are studies that are looking at how many apps and how much time you are spending. I don't know, looking at your Facebook or Instagram account or something like this, or playing a game or something. Okay, and you can have also physiological measures. So taking hormones levels at different times of the day or for certain period of time. Okay, so the principle is taking many information for a certain period of time that can be short. It can have many assessment in one day, for example, and you can have 15 days, or we'll see that later. But the principle is you take a lot of information, okay, about behavior, emotion, perception, whatever. Okay. Okay, let's start first with the positive thing. The first thing is, okay, if I'm asking you either how many times you check your phone, that will be worse, or your email per day, okay? So, well, I think that, yeah, for this, I don't know, how many times, in your opinion, you check your email? Especially now, you're like,
per day?
on your email, yeah, per exactly.
No, seriously.
That's true, especially for our line of work. I think we spend a lot of time.
I think the average person needs, let's see, 4 to 6. The average person, not us.
Yeah, so you don't count us. But the fact is, yeah, so the idea is that we can't really know, and usually if I'm asking you, for example, how many times you check your phone a day, and you will say, well, I don't know. I remember that was David asking that he was asking, and people were saying, like, I don't know, 20, 40 times a day, and usually the average is more than 80 or something. So, it's gives you the idea that sometimes we don't realize how many times we are doing a behavior. So it's the fact that it's not only the retrospective bias, it's also the fact that we are biased in, recollecting the information, but any kind of information, even not being able to estimate correctly what we are doing. So that we and if I'm asking you also, for example, this is because we don't really have an objective image of what we are doing. But if I'm asking you, for example, how do you feel at the moment? You will give me this information. Okay, so information, bad, good. How did you feel this morning? It's already, you have to think about this morning, okay? And how do you feel in general? It's a different thing. So how do I base my in general? And if I'm asking you, how did you feel, I don't know, August the 12th? Unless something really particular happened this day, it's very difficult to recall. So you say, oh, maybe, I don't know, I'm kind of a, happy person in general, so I would guess that maybe on April 8th or 10th, 12th, given that it was the holidays, maybe kind of feeling okay. So this kind of thing. But you are reconstructing the information. Okay? So the idea is that except when I'm asking you how do you feel in this moment, when I'm asking you to recall an information or to give me also the in general, you have to base your responses. No, you have to base your responses on your beliefs about yourself when it's in general, okay? Or when I'm asking about, I don't know, last week, or when it's also in terms of consumption, food consumption, or a cigarette, or alcohol consumption, and you try to recall the information depending on who you are. Okay, so I'm someone who drinks not that much. So last week, yeah, maybe I didn't drink much more than usual, so I'm going to give you information like this. Okay, so it's going to be I have to recall, and what does it mean? Some alcohol or not. So it's the bias of the survey, but you have when you're asking people how much do you drink, it's also this bias that is very difficult to estimate. For someone drinking a lot, that would be 2 drinks, and for others it will be 10. So you have this bias, but when you're asking about the past behavior, it's even more biased because you have to construct the information and you're basing usually your responses on what you know about yourself, which is usually not really objective knowledge. Okay, so this is whereas when you're asking people, if I'm asking you several times a day, how do you feel, then I will be able, for example, for 2 weeks, I will be able to give you a general idea of how do you feel in general, okay, rather than just reconstructing. Okay. The other advantage is the fact that you can generalize. So, for example, here there was a study, by the way, many of my slides, I have to acknowledge that I should have done that from the beginning. We did a summer school on intensive longitudinal data in July, and Cornelia first did a talk on many of the information are from in her talk, but also talk from some years ago that she did an ACT conference. Anyway, generalizability in a sense of you need to, it can be more, you can generalize the information because it represents more what is happening in real life. So the ecological validity. Okay. So for example, there was a study in which you ask, how do you feel? So the mood. And you also measure, so in the morning, and you measure how many hours you sleep, more or less respect to the average. Okay, so compared to the average, your average, did you sleep more or less? Okay, and I'm asking you at the same time, how do you feel? Okay, and when you look at the different data, depending on the if I'm asking, for example, only the adolescents, okay, well, it's very young as an adolescent, but you have, the more you sleep, the better you feel, okay. But when you look after at older older adults, for example, well, it's not, it's not a linear. So I need to ask several population and, because you have this belief that the more you sleep, the better it is, the better you feel. Although depending on your age, it will be different. Okay. So, for example, the older you get, if you sleep more, maybe it's because you are not feeling well. Okay, so which means that so there is not this linear relation anymore. Okay, so it's also asking that every day to different population to have a better idea of what is going on and so to be able to generalize to different situations, different samples, and different populations. Okay. The other thing that I think is really, really important, well, the retrospective bias and the ecological validity are really important, but this one is, I think, for psychology and to understand a bit more about psychological processes. I think intensive data collection or intensive longitudinal study or ambulatory assessment, as you want to call it, is one big important, I think, aspect or benefit or of intensive longitudinal studies is the fact that you can see the difference. It's not only between persons, okay, that you can see that you have variation within persons. Okay. So you're not, for example, here that was the, if you look at different people, okay, but I'm at the level of my sample, so the relation between anger and heart rate, okay, so if you look at the general tendency, okay, so you see a negative relation, okay, but if you look at the person, the first person, that would be so third person, I can see the second, and the first, okay, the first is up, you have that. So you have different rates, okay, so depending on something that is wrong here. But the fact is, yeah, and depending on, if you look at each person, then the relation will be different. Okay, so you have the within person, you have a relation that, the heartbeat is high, but depending on your level of heart rate in general, the mean, okay, the relation will be different. Okay, so depending on your baseline, I would say, the relation can be different between anger and heart rate. Okay. So the fact that the association of the between and within person will be different. So it will give you, so depending on where you put the lens, you will have a different relation. Okay. So if you look only at the between level, then maybe you will have one relation, but instead if you look at different patterns of different people, then it will tell you a different story. And this is, so one thing is, you have differences between within and between person, and especially considering that the psychological processes are dynamic. They can change over time. So maybe also a relation between, I don't know, between one concept and the other, depending on where you are in time, it will be different. Okay, so it's also that. The fact that the dynamic part of the processes, and I think that now with this kind of data collection and the kind of analysis that one is able to do on those data, you have this information and you can really put into light the fact that the dynamic of some psychological processes that are not linear and that are not the same all the time. So I think that is very interesting. Okay. So, for example, you can have what kind of information that you can get if you, for example, collect information about emotion. So, for example, Bergen and Vidal in 2015, they studied different type of emotions, okay, and they change. They look at how long they last, okay. So how long people will report the same emotion before changing, okay. So they were in the median information. It's about sadness is 48 hours, anxiety and guilt 4 hours, fear 1 hour, and shame 30 minutes. Okay, so depending on the emotion, you all have different cycle, okay, of periodicity. So it's also important, I think, when you study dynamic processes and the frequency, it has an implication in what kind of method or what kind of assessment you're going to have. You know, if you're, for example, saying that shame is, you know, it lasts 30 minutes, but if you, I don't know, measure shame every 5 hours, maybe you won't get, you know, what you want. Whereas if you, sadness, and if you measure it every 20 minutes, you might not get that much information because it will be the same for 48 hours, okay? What kind of dynamic processes you can study in terms of emotion, for example, talking about emotion because, you know, when we talk about anxiety, neuroticism, I think it's relevant for that. So you have the frequency with one experiences anxiety. So, for example, how many time I'm feeling anxious, you know, in the period of time that I'm assessing this emotion. The average, so the intensity, how strong I feel anxious. The fluctuations, so the variability, okay, and the instability in the sense of, you know, I will tell you that later, but you can, you know, you can vary, but slowly. So depending on the, how do you call that? What? No. I'm saying about the amplitude of the wave. So you can change. Not really. Well, you know, you can vary, but you can vary very slowly, or you can vary. Yeah, phase. Anyway, that doesn't matter. But just the fact that, you know, it can vary very slowly or very rapidly, and you know, the instability, for example. And the temporal dependency. So this is really aggressive in the sense of how much. Um, how much you feel anxious will influence how you feel, how anxious you will feel, you know, in 1 hour. Okay. Whether it will have an influence or not. Okay. So, for example, and you can see differences in people. There are some people, you know, who drag down their anxiety for hours, or you know, bad mood or something like this, or some people are changing very rapidly. So this is depending on the inertia, for example, that you're talking about. Okay. So the type of research question, it's a bit of a summary of what I just said, but so you can focus. So when you collect those data, so for example, how do you feel, you know, 5 times a day or 15 days, for example. So you can focus on inter-individual differences. You can, you know, just look at the mean and you know, how much, you know, people will differ. And with this, you can say, okay, as the advantage, they will reduce the bias. So people will have the real information and not, you know, people trying to recall what they were feeling, you know, 2 days ago or something like this. But at the same time, it's a bit reductive, you know. If you go, you know, through the whole process of collecting data for so many days and, you know, and so many times a day, and just to get out with mean, you know, not really worth it. So it's a lot of time and energy consumed just for one information. So the advantages, it's mostly about the fact that you can look at changes across time, variation, so depending on how anxious you're feeling and how you interact with people, so you can look at the variation between different constructs at the same time. The time lag, I will tell you about that. The fact that how anxious I'm feeling right now will have an influence of how I will behave with others at time plus one. Okay, that will be a cost lag. And inter-individual differences in intra-individual processes. So, for example, my baseline of my trait, anxiety trait might influence, the variability, or if I'm really high in anxiety trait, maybe I will show more inertia than others, or something like this. So we can cross different levels, so inter-individual and intra-individual levels. Okay. So these are the type of question. Right now, I just put, but I could put many slides with many publication. Now it's just one after the other with many different different things. So you have social interaction, you have in clinical, in social, and I think everyone now is using I would say, or exploiting the advantages of intensive longitudinal studies, and as Julia will show tomorrow, the fact that now they are more and more developing models that can test statistically and show statistically some indexes that are very interesting, rather than just looking at the mean in general and won't give you more information than one time and a half. Okay, so yeah, I'm just repeating myself, but sometimes it can be useful. So, for example, ideally, if I'm asking you how do you feel, so you can have, the general tendencies. So you can see that, two people, so 1 and 2, they have, you can see variability, but the mean level, the average will be at different levels. Okay, so that would be the general tendency from all the data I gathered. Okay, here, for example, you have 100 times. Okay. Then you have the intra-individual variability. So how much it's variable. Okay, so the fact that the larger variability, the larger fluctuation over time. Okay, so you can see, for example, that one has more variation. Okay, than the second. The second is slower. Okay, you have the wave that is larger, so that there is less variability. Okay. I'm just repeating myself, but I think it's important. So I said that I'm not talking about statistics, but it's just to give you some information what can be used as index of variability without a very elaborate model, okay, or a statistical model. So you have mean square successive differences that you can take in the difference between people, between the time points, okay? And you have the more elaborate way of doing it in autoregressive models, and Julia will talk about that a bit. Innovation, okay, not really, but you will talk about autoregressive model, but there would be an index of variability. Okay. One thing I wanted to talk was about the difference between instability and variability. Okay, so the fact that variability doesn't take into account the temporal level. Okay, so it just tells you if it varies, around the mean, for example, but it doesn't tell you whether it's the large wave or not. Okay, if you are going up and down every 5 minutes, or if it's you're changing mood, but more every 4 hours or every day, for example. So instability and so in instability you're considering temporal dependency. I had one yeah, for example, here, so the fact that, variability is, how it is different from the mean. So you vary from the mean and, you have okay. But in instability, so if, for example, you think about your vacation and for you had, 1 week of sunshine and 1 week of rain, okay, so every day, the first week rains and the other is sunshine or vice versa, whereas your colleague has an average the same, okay, but it was 1 day rain, then sun, then rain, then sun, then rain, then sun, okay. So when you look at that, and the variability is the same, okay, but the instability is different, okay. So your colleague has a very unstable weather because every day changes, whereas you had quite stable, okay, over a week it was sunny or it was rain. Okay. So depending on, so the variability gives you some information, but it doesn't give you the whole picture. Okay, so you need indexes, for example, of instability to understand a bit better about the dynamic of the processes that you're studying. Another indexes, so it's when you want to look at instability or you look at inertia. So I told you about before the fact that how much what I'm feeling right now will have an impact on how I will feel in 2 hours, for example. Okay, so this is inertia, the fact that the more how I feel now will influence the way I will feel in 2 hours. I will have larger inertia than someone who has a very small influence from one time to the onto the other. Okay. So higher inertia, you will have less random fluctuation over time and wider range of fluctuation. Okay, so it will, the way I feel now will influence, 2 hours later or 4 hours later, and then I will go down, for example, and then go down, and it will, last long, and then well. So this will be, inertia. So that I will show variability, but in a very slow way. So in people who are stuck, in certain mood or something like this, they show higher inertia. Okay, so and usually we look at the aggressive parameter that we will talk about tomorrow. The other thing that is also very interesting is the cross-lagged, and I will at the end I will try to exemplify all these different indexes that you can look at, statistical related to EC. So I will give you some information about that later. But here it's, as I said before, the fact that how I'm feeling right now or how I felt 2 hours ago and how it will affect my actual behavior. So the way I felt 2 hours ago affects the way I behave now. Okay, so there will be the path from emotion T-1 and behavior T. Okay, and in the same way, I can look also at the behavior, how I behaved 2 hours ago. So, for example, I behaved badly. Okay, and I was kind of not really nice to my friend. And then 2 hours later, I can feel bad. Okay, because so you have this influence of how I behaved 2 hours ago, and it impacts the way I feel now. Okay, and usually you look at that with the dynamical structural equation modeling. It's one way to look at it. Okay, so yeah, in terms of the advantages, that would be most of the advantages of using intensive longitudinal studies. That would be so the fact that it's reduced its prospective record bias, generalizability, the time structure, there will be dynamic processes, the quasi-experimental, I talked about that, but the fact that you are in the field, so you're in real life, but at the same time, so you measure things, but at the same time, you can't say that it's experimental because You are not controlling for all the information, all the things that is happening to the participant at the moment of the assessment. Okay, now I'm going more in terms of, now that, we saw why we should use it, okay? You could like a clock or something that I don't know. We're going to see different things, different issues regarding the designs, okay? So first, what kind of design you can have? So you have what they call the signal contingent. So for example, randomly, I will send you a prompt or a text or something, depending on what you're using, and asking you to fill in a questionnaire, for example. Tell me how you feel. Okay. Or in the case of EC, for example, you could do like a procedure, so I will send you an email or a text and, oh, go to this website and complete this section. Okay? So this is signal contingent in the sense of it's only, I'm sending you a signal, but there is no regularity. As you can see here, it's just randomly I'm sending you a signal. Okay? The type of design that you're using, and I will tell you that, has an impact on what kind of analysis you can do. So it's very important. You have time contingent. So time contingent, you have different things. So you have fixed time. So for example, every 2 hours, I'm sending you a prompt asking you to fill in and to tell me how you feel. Okay, so every 2 hours for 15 days, and I'm asking you how do you feel. So it will be fixed time. The other are the pseudo randomized. So the fact that because the problem with the fixed time is that for some people they are they can, and they are enrolled in the study, and after maybe 2 days, they know that, at 2 o'clock, at 4 o'clock, at 6 o'clock, maybe a bit frequent, but, you know what I mean? They are waiting for, so, they know that every day at 2, they're going to receive something and they have to complete. So it might interfere a bit too much with the life. Okay? So the alternative is to have like windows. So for example, instead, so imagine I want in interval of 2 hours or 4 hours, let's say more realistic. So an interval of 4 hours, I'm going to randomly send a prompt. So not everybody will receive the same at the same time, but within these 4 hours or these 2 hours, usually if I want to do every 4 hours, but within, I don't know, half an hour, I will send you a prompt, but you don't know when exactly. Okay? So people are not waiting for. When you have a life, you're not waiting for, but some people don't have life and they just look at their phone and waiting for a prompt, okay, to respond. Okay, and then you have it's not really time contingent, it is, but not really. It's the continuous. So when you are, for example, measuring heart rate or step counts or something like this, it will be continuous. Okay. The other, the even contingent is here. I'm not sending you a prompt. I just, for example, the example I was saying before. So every time you're having a cigarette, I'm asking you to fill in a questionnaire. Okay. Or every time you fight with your partner or with your friends, you can send. I'm going to ask you to fill in a questionnaire. So you go online or whatever on your app, and you fill in the questionnaire. Okay, so it's really depending on how the life of the participant, okay, of the frequency of what things are happening. So depending on what you are studying, if you're looking at something that is not really frequent, okay, it might be easier to go for even contingent, okay, rather than just measuring it assessing every 4 hours, and then many 4 hours you won't see anything. Okay? Rather than, and maybe the event will, happen in between the 4 hours. Okay? So the likelihood of having tackling exactly the event that is just occurring, you just ask the even conditions. Okay. So, for example, complex stress events with interaction. We have a study actually in which we, here today, but we were asking people every time they had a meaningful social interaction, then to complete some information about how they feel and how they felt during the interaction, how many people were present, and their behavior. Then you have the daily diary. Okay, so daily diary and the frequency, obviously, as you say, you have only to complete once a day. Okay, usually at the end of the day, I'm asking you, what happened today, or especially if you are looking, for example, for not really recurrent events or that are more rare during the day, that maybe, it will happen once a day at most, then maybe the daily diary might be the way to go. Okay? So depending on the phenomenon you are studying, you might choose a different design. Okay? The other is the interactive sampling. So you mix the two in the sense of, for example, you're measuring the heart rate, okay? And as soon as the heart rate is reaching a certain level, then it sends a text or a prompt to complete the questionnaire, okay? Or as soon as you reach, 5,000 steps a day, and then you will receive a prompt, okay? So, or as soon as you are in a certain area, okay, location, then you will receive a prompt to complete the questionnaire, okay? So this is more interactive design. Okay. Yeah. So these are the main type of schedule that we have. So signal contingent, it's different from the time contingent, okay? Because the signal is random. You don't have, so it's randomly taken during the day, for example, whereas the time contingent or interval with the randomly presented prompt in the middle or in a small interval, so it's fixed. Okay, so every hour or every morning, every afternoon, every evening, or something like this, or every 4 hours, and even contingent. So when something is happening, okay, you are measuring it. So one thing is, I was saying before, the fact that depending on what you want to assess, what kind of phenomenon, and what kind of analysis you want to do. So for example, if you want to do autoregressive and look at inertia, you have to have the time contingent. The interval between the assessment, the data point, need to be the same. Okay. So it needs to be 5 times a day, and every time will be separated by 2 hours or 4 hours, for example. Okay, because you need to consider that the time 1 or time -1 and time t or time, it's going to be the same. Okay, so if you want to see whether how I feel 2 hours ago influences how I feel 2 hours later, then I need to see that several times. Okay, and not one time 4 hours delay and then the other 2, and so you need to have a fixed interval to have this kind of analysis. So obviously it works within days, but there are some tricks that it's obviously the way you felt the last time of the day. You're not considering it as influencing the next time, the day after. So, but it's okay. But so if you want to look at inertia and this kind of innovation and etc., it's better to have a time contingent, a very fixed interval between the data points. But at the same time, if you're looking at, and in the other, if you take the other perspective, if I want to study something that is not occurring every 2 hours or 4 hours, then, you know, the time contingent, I'm just losing my time and the participant's time, and there's maybe, you know, in 100 data points I will have, you know, 3 or 4, you know, even that is alternate. So it will be better, it might be better to use an even contingent, so you will be sure that you measure or that you tackle the event or the thing that is happening that you want to say. Okay, this is actually, yeah, there is a paper that is very nice on it's a meta-analysis on laboratory assessment. So from, you know, it gives you an overview of the kind of design that you have and, you know, how it presents. So it's 477 articles, so it groups already some, you know, large sample of studies. And look, for example, when you see the distribution of the kind of design that we're using, mostly signal contingent, okay? So, as I said, the signal contingent, you can't really look at the thing that you extensively to, so you can look at variability, you can look at the mean, or you can look, but you can't really look at the dynamic processes that within evolution in the same way. Okay, so even base, mixed, and interval contingent. But so far, signal contingent, and usually the average is 6.5 assessments per day. Okay, and the length of the study is on average 12.4. Okay, so this gives you a bit of information of what is out there about that. So yeah, I just said that before. So, but yeah, so the frequency and the continuity of the phenomenon. So depending on what kind of phenomenon we're studying, you're going to choose a different thing. The other thing that you need to think about when you choose the design. So the time contingent is very interesting because you can look, you know, very into depth into some dynamic into the phenomenon you're studying. But at the same time, if you are thinking, for example, of studying, I don't know, emotion, and you are asking every 2 hours, you know, how we feel, you know, for 15 days, you know, it's a burden for, you know, I don't know if you ever participated into a longitudinal study, but when I do a pilot after 2 days, I'm like, it's just too many, you know, it's just like, so you need to think, you know, from our perspective, oh yeah, you know, the more the better, you know, but from a participant perspective, you know, sometimes, you know, after a while, you know, you won't have anything because they just drop out, okay, so, so yeah, you need to, if you have highly motivated sample, then you can, you know, you can have a high frequency of assessment. But when you have, for example, clinical sample, okay, for example, we did some studies with Emanuele on BPD, who are not really known for, you know, being, you know, reliable and very constant. So it's very difficult to have the number of assessments that you need, okay? But I will tell you about a bit more about compliance. Okay? But yeah, the fact that you need to think that, yeah, the more the better, but the more likely you will lose participant on the way. Okay. This is, yeah, how many assessment you should do per day, and you know, the relationship between the number of assessments per day and the number of days. Okay, so it gives you a kind of information. Usually, it's, you know, it's following the rule that, you know, the higher the number of assessment per day, then the lower or the smaller the number of days. Okay, because you're trying to find a balance, not to have such a burden for the placement. So you try to find an equilibrium, a balance between the two. Yeah, I already said that before. Let me twice the same slide. Okay, what kind of population? So this is also very interesting. It's more an overview of what kind of studies have been done and what kind of population and samples. So a convenience sample in college students might be, the more the convenience means that as many people as they can get, large around it and asking like this. And college students, surprisingly, I was surprised that it was not that. But at the same time, the advantage of the ESM studies is that you can go, it's out of the lab. So you can reach other people. Okay. So you can reach out other populations easier. Um, it's this, and then in terms of the kind of studies they were looking at, you can see that most of them were on healthy population, but also in clinical population. I would say that it's mostly the two big samples, although the healthy is also the easiest to get, I would say. Okay, this is the age of samples, so they have a whole, so you can see young have a whole, well, it's student population of the sample, especially depending on the recruitment, but if you are recruited through participants or through students, then the likelihood of having the same kind of range of age will be very high. Okay, but it gives you a bit of overview what kind of population. So childhood is very low, and also with the old elderly, it's not that many studies for them. Okay, what do you need to measure? So if I'm talking about emotion, self-report, okay, behavior, so I'm just asking you to indicate a series of information. So you have three main, I would say, tools for collecting data. You have SMS and text messaging. Using mobile phone, I would say it's the cheapest in the sense of easiest to do, but at the same time it's very limited because you can't send a big survey through SMS or text message, okay? And you can't do branching, so if you're asking a question, it's kind of limited, let's say. It's easier in the sense of you can reach many people, but you can't have a lot of information about that. So you have web surveys. Okay, so for example, you can use Qualtrics and send invitation regularly to complete the same questionnaire, okay? But it requires to be connected to internet at the time. Now, I think it's less of a problem, but I think that most of the time most people are connected. Earlier it could have been a problem. And then you have, I would say, the most sophisticated way. It's you install an app on the participant's phone, and you can program the app such that without internet, it collects the data, it sends you the prompt because it's already programmed, and then at the end of the study, the data can be sent to the experimenter, or every day it's downloaded or something like that. But you need, some apps. Now it's, I think, more and more. Before it was a bit expensive, but now you can also, if you're a bit, if you're into programming, you can you can create your own app, but you need time and resources to do that. But you have also apps that can be bought, and you can use that. But it's very useful because you don't need to use a survey or a website or something like this. It's just on your person's phone. Okay. at the same time, it's a disadvantage to be on the person's phone. So, for example, if the person uses his phone or something, then you have all the data that are lost. Okay? Especially there is not automatic upload every day of the data. Okay, yeah, I wanted to show you, so that was self-report. Then some studies that collected data intensively, more than self-report. Okay, so you have cognitive behavior. So for example, this study is the looked at the relationship between mood and memory and working memory performance. Okay, and the fact that, for example, so they were looking at also the differences between people who are, for example, contragonic orientation, so which means that contragonic, I learned something before, that was the fact that when you are in a bad mood, but you keep being in bad mood, in the sense that it's not convenient, it's not functional, but you're doing it, okay, you're doing that, okay? So it's to you maintain yourself, you know, in that. So it's in terms of emotion regulation, okay, activity. So they collected data in a very large age range, okay, on regulation. So sample 14 to 84, 54 times in 3 weeks. Okay, so this time they didn't, I think it was random, okay, so signal contingent, I think. And so they were measuring every time, so they were measuring their affect regulation orientation in this moment, okay? And then they were asked to complete 2 trials of demanding working memory tasks, okay? So typical numerical memory updating tasks. Asked to look for the numbers while doing other things. And they obtained so negative correlation between contragonic orientation, so the fact that tendency to maintain or enhance the feeling, and average working performance. Okay, and the fact that it's occurrence of orientation with temporary declines in working memory. So you can look, you know, at different. It's not only self-report. Now they are developing a task, and I think also via, you know, for example, when you're using web and you can, you know, do tasks several times a day, and you can have cognitive behavior that is measured in a more effective way. The physical activity, so this is typical. So you have the old version of the pedometer that people were wearing at the belt. Okay, now you don't see that anymore. You have either the watch or the phone. Okay, and working. This was it's not a step counter. It was accidentally. So they were measuring, you know, how vigorous the physical activity was, okay, and reporting extroversion and neuroticism, okay, and self-reported questions. So the physical activity was assessed with actual behavior and also self-report, okay. And they asked 2 samples, okay, so one 47, 55-year-old woman, and then 70, 85, so older sample, okay? And they, with this study, they show that there is a relationship between neuroticism and vigorous activity or physical activity, okay? And extroversion is only with the self-report, is only associated with the self-report physical activity. But this is true only in the middle-aged women, okay, rather than the older men and women. So this kind of study that you can have, so self-report and then cognitive and physical, you have physiology. So for example, we have different, you can measure blood pressure, pulse, ECG, the cardiovascular activity, okay? We have to talk, I think it's in July with I don't know who was telling me about the reliability of this measure, but it's like repeating it here as well, the fact that, some measures are not really reliable. So it's very difficult to have a tool that, what is exactly measuring and how stable is the measurement. So you would need to, given that you are more expert on physiological measures, I think it's the main problem is the fact that the reliability of the device is confined in wearable devices that are available for the moment. So probably the conclusions are drawn from this study. You might want to look at in a cautious way. Anyway, physiology, you have also different things, but hormone level, okay, so you have a spit in the tube every morning or something like this, and complete a self-report, and you can look at the relationship between hormone level and different activities or behavior or thoughts or cognition, etc. Muscle activity, and if you're going around with this kind of device, it might look weird, but it is possible, I would say. But again, it's always one thing is to do this kind of measure in a lab, the other is the everyday life, wearable devices that might be okay. The other thing that you can measure are sounds and speech. Okay. So you have, for example, it gives you the information, so you can have the context, so location, activity, whether I am with other people or not, okay, whether I'm talking or not, okay, whether, if there is a lot of noise or it's quiet, or you can hear waves or not. The verbal content, so you can have also the information about what kind of language I'm using, depending on the context and with whom I am, okay? Vocal features, so pitch, tempo, mood, so the prosody. You can gather information from all this audio snips that are taken. So usually the way it works is that people are going around with this kind of microphone or even the phone, and it's taking snips. So it's not recording all day, obviously, but it's just, bits, for example, 30 seconds every 30 minutes, for example. I'm sampling that, and based on this, I will have some information, okay, on where the person is and what he's doing and what he's talking about, if he's talking or not. How. Okay? For example, here we have a study on which, so they studied in 2 samples, okay, and so they had to wear those microphones, and they were doing 4.8 in average time, 30 seconds, okay, per hour. Okay, so we have a lot of information. And then they were using social environment coding of sound inventory. So it's, I think it's looking at the same kind of thing. Okay, it's a way to code this kind of information. Okay, so it's you're coding the information and it's given by those little snips. Okay. And they were a personality assessment, and they show that the behavior associated with positive affect, so such as laughing or talking to people or singing, but I don't know how frequent this is, varied according to a certain rhythm, okay, around average wait time, okay. But it was not the case with behavior associated with negative effects, so for example, arguing. Okay. And they found also that inter-individual differences moderated this within participants. relation that we found. Okay. So this is kind of information you can find. Surroundings, so you had some pictures. I think one of the first, what is his name? We did the first study on the situation, and he was taking this picture. Ryan Sherman, okay. So they took those pictures and trying to have an objective way of measuring the situation. So we took pictures to have an objective way of having information. Because when you're asking people, where are you, how many people, and it's always, or how they have this survey to assess situations, but it's always subjective in the sense of it's the way I perceive the situation. So we try with this little camera to take pictures. So that would be how it takes mini movies and try to understand. So, but you can do many things. You have the mobile sensing as well, on which so you can have many information. So, depending you can have the information depending on where you are, about where you are, if it's night or day, or the picture, the temperature, and all this kind of thing, or using Bluetooth, where you are and what kind of devices are around you. And you have so many studies looking at different things. So, for example, the relationship between mood and social situation at home or at work, but it was moderated by the personality traits, okay, or personality traits and smartphone usage, okay, so extroversion, less often use game apps, okay, or something like this. So trying to, those was the kind of personality traits in the sense of tracking, so the neuroticism, so neurotic people tend to have smaller activity radius. Okay, so based on the GPS information, we show that neurotic people have a smaller, they move less around. Okay, blah blah blah. This is, but you can't see anything. I think it's too small, but this is the different things. So you need to think of when you're doing momentary assessment or ambulatory assessment. So you need to determine the research question, okay? Whether it's experience, behavior, physiology, then identify the target sample, the size, the population of interest, the design sampling protocol. So depending if it's variable, fixed time, event-based, continuous, etc. And choose the technology platform, configure devices or survey, pilot tests. I would say this, you need to put that in red, more than in red. Using pilot testing. Because, it's nice, but at the same time, it's really costly. This kind of study, it requires resources and time and any kind of resources that, not only monetary, but also energy and time consuming for the researcher, for the participants. So you really need to be sure that when your study starts, it starts, and you don't have to stop it one day after and say, oh, oops, I forgot one question. Okay. So this kind of thing. And recruit participants and run the study. So that will be the last. So you have, depending on the survey, I'm going to be very quick. We knew about surveys. Survey content, whatever you want to access. But my advice would be think about the length. Okay, so you need to think that, especially if you're repeating, 5 times a day, you're not going to ask 25 or 50 questions every time. Okay, so you need to have a certain way. So, for example, when we did the study on situation assessment and emotion, we used diamonds, which is the short version of a survey that is assessing the subjective perception of what is happening in the situation. For the physical activity, for example, we have the iPad, that would be the full, measure for physical activity, but you have also the best would be the step counter or accelerometer. Or if you can't do that, I would suggest to use a single item. It can, it has shown good good validity. So although it's only one question, but the fact that you can't, go, I don't know if you know, if everybody knows the impact, but it's very long and it's kind of costly for the president to respond, so we can't do that 5 times a day. Then also for survey, we did that. We did a study actually on that, showing that when you're measuring emotions, instead of asking the same emotion over and over, you can have a sample or a set of items, and depending on the time or the data point, you're going to assess some of them or not. Okay. And then that's what we call plan missing data designs. Okay. So this is a good way to get rid of the repetition. Okay. Because after people are expecting what kind of emotion you're going to ask and respond more automatically. So the survey length, I was saying, the fact that you need to think about the precedent. Okay, the more the better, again, the reliability, you want more item for a survey, but at the same time, your participant moves to decrease. Okay, not the more the better. So you need to find the right balance with what you want to assess ideally and what the participant is able to assess in a reliable way, rather than just responding, randomly because it was too tired to answer. Yeah, the idea would be to arrive at 20 minutes a day. So that would be, it's a very rough estimation, but if you go for 5 times a day, do not go over 20. So you try to find a good balance. Okay. Same thing here. So it's depending on 6 to 8 reports. So 10 items. If you go for many assessments. If you go less assessment, maybe you can increase the number. Okay, or daily diary, then you can increase them. So you always find a balance between, because what counts also it's the number of observations you have. So you need to find the one balance. Okay, but usually, so in the same study, you have the length. So it's also, you need to find the right balance, the number of days and the number of assessment per day. It ranges from 3 days to 3 weeks. I think, yeah, or sometimes they do like 2 weeks and then 1 month and then 2 weeks. So rather than doing the full monthly, like the full 6 weeks in a row, just 2 and separate it. So we do that. And so repeated sequences of daily measurement. It would be a right way. The risk is that you're going to lose participants in between, but you need to find a way. Okay. So this is where I'm going at, the fact that it's many advantages, it's a bit complicated, and it's also things that maybe you can't. You have to anticipate it. So, for example, the activity. So, for example, when I'm asking you every day, like 5 times a day, the same question, how sad do you feel? How sad do you feel? How sad do you feel? And you go, no, I'm not sad. And then, maybe a little bit, so you need to find, through reactivity, maybe not asking only the questions you're interested in, but trying to vary. So I'm not asking you only sad, but a series of emotion, although I'm not really interested in that, but you can have a right balance rather than focusing only on this that will create reactivity. So you have, I don't know if you know the mere measurement effect. So the fact just asking people, how much do you intend to do physical activity? Just this question will increase the likelihood that you do physical activity. So imagine when you're asking people 5 times a day, how many steps or how much activity you're doing now, or, it's increasing the activity, so you need to find point the answer. Okay, but yeah, so there are some studies showing that there are some ways so you can reduce burden, and you're going to see the compliance. Reduce the impact of self-monitoring, avoid demand to change, ask for more than one behavior, I'm saying. No feedback, okay, or no back button to see what did I respond earlier, okay. And record behavior after it occurred and not during, so maybe the event contingent might be different, but rather asking, I don't know, every 4 hours, did you happen to fight with your partner, for example, rather than every time you're fighting or answering? And a randomized sampling scheme that would be, if you're not interested in, the statistical index, that might be better to have a signal contingent rather than, a fixed time, because this way people waiting to answer and stopping everything they're doing. Oh, I have to complete this survey. How to detect it, so you can look at general trends. So if you see when, for example, talking about physical activity, you can see, for example, the first days, you have an increase, and then it's plateau, and then so maybe the first 2 days you can remove that, or the first 5 data points, depending on the phenomena you are seeing. But yeah, so you look at trends and to see whether there is a general increase or not in behavior, to see whether demonstrate reactivity and changes in association. So depending on what you're looking, if you're looking at covariation, but depending on the data points, you have different relations. So maybe at the beginning it's a certain type of covariation, and then after it might be an indicator of reactivity. Okay. The other is to control group design, in which either you're not measuring anything or you're measuring something different. Okay. Or with prospective questionnaires, so you can see. Okay. But yeah, you can have a confound between reactivity and memory effect, as I was saying, the fact that if I'm asking you, how much physical activity did you do last week, you may have biases in your responses. Selectivity is selectivity in the sense of when you're asking people to participate into a longitudinal study, you get only the motivated people. Okay. And so it's kind of, a problem with that. And this is also the impact of the incentive. So, especially young people and men are more likely to participate with financial incentives, okay. Whereas women and older women participate without an incentive. But so depending, you need to think about that and the burden, the fact that if I'm asking, okay, you want to participate to a study in which every 2 hours you all have to answer for 3 weeks. That's fine. You need to find a way to convince people and to avoid that it's only the motivation to help science or to feel really, or in terms of, for example, personality trait, you might have a bias in terms of what kind of activity you get. Okay. About compliance, this is the most difficult. The first study that I did in intensive engineering study with Emanuele, we did that with adolescents. That was like ask adolescents to do something regularly. That's not working. Okay, so that was very difficult. We even tried with incentive and we didn't care. Okay, so yeah, you need to check, and it's why also it's costly. You can't, okay, I'm starting the study, the data collection, and yeah, it goes on the own or on its own. It's not going to work. You have to monitor. And people sometimes they forget, and even if they receive prompt or one day they don't do it, then depends if you want to use your version or not. So you have to be behind them and say, okay, send an email, say yes, sir, that you didn't respond, so please continue. You have to be there. try to enforce the response. Okay, and for even contingent, for example, even if you don't send a message to ask for assistance, you can send a reminder. So, for example, every morning, remember today, every time you're gonna smoke a cigarette or something, or have a drink, then you're gonna have to complete this step. Okay. This is, the average compliance. I'm gonna run out of time, so, but yeah, trying to see how many, so compliance in percent, so you can see it's usually depending on also the incentive, I would say, compliance. We have, for example, that university sample, if you're promising course credit, then the compliance goes up. Okay, for money it works sometimes and sometimes not, depending on the financial crisis, it might work better. But for some population, but yeah, so you have this fish shape, then the compliance, so small non-linear effect of assessment per day. So depending, you can see the compliance. I was saying the fact that the compliance, the higher the burden, one would say, oh, the lower the compliance, but it depends, what kind of study in there. It's a meta-analysis, and depending on what you're studying, the motivation of your population, etc. So you don't have a linear, perfect linear compliance. In research alliance, so I think it's important, for example, when you present the participant, the aim of the research, so you just include the participant. The participant knows that he's part of something, okay, and he's included, and it's just not a participant or a subject in the experiment, but you need to create like this feeling that I'm part of something, and the compliance will go up, okay. And if there are problems, and you are there responding, and so you need to have a lot of people. Be aware of intrusiveness, so maybe the fact that, as you're saying, just by curiosity, you could try, to set up a study in which every 2 hours you are asked to fill in a questionnaire. After 2 days, you just leave me alone. So allow delay responding and incentives and saying so allow delay responding. For example, we have like a window, so even if the participant doesn't respond in a minute, but half an hour, or you can give some space to answer. Limited number of items, simple items, and repeatability, and people understand the question. It's like a survey, but it's even even more important. I would say it's the same logic. The other, running out of time, I would say, but yeah. Statistical power, and I think it's important how many, I would say, to increase power, better to add people than observations, data cleaning, so it's also, what it is I'm talking about, we did some this summer, but yeah, I'm trying to, you need to keep track of everything, so really, it's very, very interesting. I would say I don't want to discourage you, it's very fascinating, and you can have a lot of information, and I think that for psychology, going into dynamic processes, but do not underestimate the amount of work. Okay, so reliability, there are some research now trying to look at that, but it's still ongoing research. Data analysis, so if you want to start, there's some nice introduction. It's a bit outdated, but it's still a good introduction. Then after, you can go to higher level than dynamic structural equation modeling or something like this, but just to have an idea of how it works and all those things. Okay. Blah, blah, blah. So I said that it's just a summary. These are the kind of handbooks that you can find that are interesting. From mobile sensing to meta-analysis on different topics, or handbooks. The handbook of research method for studying daily life. It's a very basic handbook, but it's really nice. Anyway. The other thing is the intervention. So you don't have only assessment, but intervention. So you can do you can usually you can do that. There are some research doing that. It's even more complicated. I wanted to go back. I have 2 minutes, I think, to go back to the topic, our topic. Even over. Yeah. I wanted to go back. What about neuroticism, anxiety, and EC? Okay. On neuroticism and anxiety, you can find some literature about trying to look at the dynamic processes regarding this emotion or states. Okay. So, for example, here, what's interesting is not the relation between uh, conditioning or anxiety and conditioning the way we study is the opposite. It's the fact that completing your conditioning task and then measure generalized anxiety disorder. So it was a way to, but what we call here longitudinal is just twice. So it's not really intensive. It's just longitudinal. It's not intensive. Okay. Delta conditioning, not intensive at all. I found one study, only one. So far, maybe we can find some more, but I believe, and it was in kids, and it's not it's longitudinal in the sense of it's twice, not intensive at all, and it's about 7 and 14-month old, and to say that learning through adult conditioning was not present. Okay, but present of individual differences in a sense of I think if I remember correctly, the kids during the conditioning fixed more the faces, show like a tendency to show a EC effect rather than the one we were looking at the shapes. So they look only at one or two, but not both. So when we were looking at the US's, showed a tendency to have an EC effect. Stronger. But this is the only thing I found. Okay. And now last semester, we did a study, and we're still trying to make sense of the data. But and I think it's very interesting. But unfortunately, we can't present any results. But the idea of EC, we do EC part-time at once, in the lab, and we see depending on we look at the the trait anxiety or state anxiety, that is it. Okay. But the idea was that first, is it EC effect stable? So the fact that if I'm taking several EC procedure, and I show the same effect. Okay. Looking at covariation, so if I look at at one time I look at the relationship between EC and anxiety or trait anxiety, but what if I'm looking at the state anxiety and EC? Okay, that was the idea. And also whether the trait, so the input differences in the trait would moderate this covariation, for example. Okay. So we did a study, so Erika organized a study today, but so it was the baseline of neuroticism, so all the measures that were in the studies, the classical studies that we've been doing. Then an EC procedure, a CS evaluation, an anxiety and intolerance to personality assessment for a state for 10 days. Okay, so every day from D2 to day 11, they have been measuring that. And day 12, they were self-reported measure. I said the sample was around 180. I don't know, they're still doing data. So it's trying to make sense. And this is the kind of thing, so don't get scared, but this is the last slide. And Julia might use some these examples for tomorrow morning. But so the idea would be to look, for example, if I want to look the inertia, that would be how big my EC effect is, and the relation to how big my EC effect will be the next time. Okay. Then I can look at the same time of the anxiety, how anxious I'm feeling now, and how it will impact how anxious I will be the next time. okay? And then I can look at crossland. So how the EC effect, well, I can also, yeah, I didn't see that, I didn't make that, but also you can look at the correlation. So the correlation between EC effect and anxiety at each time, okay, within each time. Okay. And then, so this is the within level. And then you can look also at the between levels, so how the trait anxiety will affect those parameters, okay? But how it will affect, I didn't put them as well, but you know, the mean and the variability, including the variability for EC or anxiety, and how the trait anxiety will influence that. So it's just, yeah, it might give us more information on the relationship between neuroticism or anxiety and EC. You know, once we have demonstrated that it's an effect that is present, but how, you know, the dynamic process of that, so that could bring us more information.